Think about your favorite brand. Why do you love it? Chances are it's not just about the product, it's about the story behind it. And today we're diving into the power of storytelling and marketing and how businesses can use emotional connections to create lasting relationships with their audience. Now, I'm curious, what's a brand story that stuck out with you? If you've got one that you want to share, drop it in the comments, send me a DM. I'm always interested in hearing new stories and why people are attached to the brands that they work with. Now, we're on season 2, episode 22, where we're obviously talking about this power of storytelling, and we've got a lot to cover. Now, what we're going to cover today in today's episode is why storytelling is essential in marketing, the psychology behind storytelling and emotional connection, the key elements of a compelling brand story, how to craft your own brand narrative, real life brands that use storytelling successfully, mistakes to avoid in storytelling, and how to implement storytelling in your marketing strategy. Now, the first question that I like to start off with this episode is, why is storytelling important or essential in marketing, right? Because as we've known, as economies have shifted, as consumers evolved in the buying behavior side of things, we know that there's been a kind of a shift from product focus to story driven marketing, right? So we know consumers just don't buy products, they buy experiences, emotions, and identities. So what storytelling does is it helps differentiate brands that are in crowded markets and essentially builds loyalty beyond just their features and price. Now, one of the aspects of storytelling that I think we like to forget about is storytelling helps enhance brand recall. And if you're not familiar with brand recall, it's essentially the ability of your consumer or your customer to remember your brand and to recall it per se within certain situations. Namely, being the fact that if they're in a situation where they're presented with the option to buy something, that they're coming to you to purchase that and not your competitors. Now, we actually saw a Stanford study that said studies show that people remember stories up to 22 times more than facts alone. And we've known this, we've mentioned this story previously, but if we look at Nike's Just Do It campaign, they built a story around shoes, right? It's not just about the product of shoes, it's about overcoming challenges and pushing limits. Now, we also know from a storytelling perspective and from previous episodes that emotional connections drive customer loyalty. And so we've seen a study from Harvard Business Review that actually found that emotionally connected customers are twice as valuable as highly satisfied ones. Now, if you listen to our previous episodes about customer loyalty, we know that highly satisfied customers already have a much higher lifetime value than just your standard customer or your standard buyer. Now, if we know that emotionally connected customers are twice as valuable as highly satisfied customers, it's hard to put a specific value behind it, but that drives home the fact that they are even more valuable when we look at emotional connections from driving customer loyalty. Now, when we think about Apple, we know that Apple's marketing isn't just about computers. We know that it's about creativity, innovation, and ultimately thinking different. Now, their buyers, their loyal buyers, have actually bought into this perspective that they're buying more than just a computer. Now, there is some psychology behind storytelling and emotional connection that we know of. One is we know that humans are actually wired for stories, right? And why is this? We know that brains process stories differently than data because we engage more, feel more, and remember more. Now, neuroscientists have actually found that stories trigger oxytocin, which is the trust hormone, which strengthens brand relationships, which is really fascinating. So when we look at how stories influence decision making, we know that the average consumer doesn't just buy based on logic alone. There are some situations where logic comes into play, but generally speaking, we know that emotion plays a huge role in purchasing decisions. So when we think about this, think about luxury brands like Rolex or Tesla. We know that they're tapping into aspirational storytelling that's going to drive desire and ultimately drive purchases, which is really fascinating to think about. Now, there are a couple key elements of a brand story that's compelling that we like to cover. First is we know every great story has a hero, right? So your brand isn't the hero, which I'd like to make a point of. Your customer is. And so we need to position your audience as the protagonist facing a challenge and make them the hero. Second, when we're building a compelling brand story, we need to make sure that there's some clear conflict or challenge. So we know that good stories need tension. So the first question to ask yourself when you're building this brand story is, what problem is your audience struggling with? Now, for example, we can see that Dove's Real Beauty campaign, They challenged the unrealistic beauty standards, which ultimately made their customers the heroes. We saw massive successes off that campaign. It's still going. They're doing very well quite off of that campaign. Now, the third piece of a compelling brand story is the transformation and resolution piece. We need to make sure that we're helping show your brand how it helps customers overcome obstacles and achieve those goals. Now, when we think about Airbnb in this situation, we know that their branding isn't just about rentals. It's about belonging anywhere, which goes into the fact of homes, not just rentals. Now, you might be asking yourself, how do I create my own brand narrative, right? Well, there's three key points that we'd like to drive home when it comes to building your own brand narrative. First is identifying your brand's core message. What is your why, and what do you stand for beyond your product? We know from previous episodes that Patagonia's mission isn't just about selling clothes, it's about environmental activism. Second, how are you using customer stories and testimonials to connect with your audience? Because we know people connect more with real experiences than corporate messaging, and we've seen that through Yeti, where they share customer adventure stories to reinforce its rugged brand identity. Now, the third element of this is we need to make sure that we're authentic and consistent across our channels. Your story should be reflected in social media, ads, email marketing, and even customer service. So when we dive into the brands that are actually utilizing storytelling very successfully, we've identified three that we felt would be a good topic of interest for this podcast. First, Coca-Cola. We know that they've built a story centered around happiness and togetherness. And we know from the polar bears to share a Coke, Coca-Cola sells emotions, not just soda. Now, back to Airbnb, we know that they sell belonging anywhere. When we look at this, we know that their marketing focuses on community connections and experiences, not just accommodations. And when we look at Warby Parker, they're driving home the fact of social good and accessibility, and they turned a simple eyewear business into a movement by donating glasses for every pair sold. Now, when we think about storytelling, we're crafting our identity, we're putting that story together, there's a couple of mistakes that we need to avoid when we're talking about storytelling. First, we need to make sure that we're not being too salesy or inauthentic. If your story feels forced, customers won't buy into it. Now, we've seen this previously with the Kardashians. Pepsi launched their controversial Kendall Jenner ad, and unfortunately it failed because it lacked authenticity. Now, the second piece of this is you're not having a clear message. It's another mistake. We know that your story should be easy to understand, so you need to avoid overcomplicating it and make it as easy to resonate with your customer. Now, the third mistake that we need to avoid is ignoring the customer's role in this relationship. We know that your brand isn't the main character and your customer is, so you need to focus on their journey and how you can improve it in the long term. Now, you might be asking this question as well. How do I implement storytelling in my marketing strategy? There's three different recommendations that we have for this. One being social media and video content. Use Instagram stories, TikTok, and YouTube to visually bring your brand story to life. And we see this through Nike's You Can't Stop Us campaign, which featured diverse athletes, which went viral for its emotional impact. Now, the second aspect of this is email marketing and blog content. Use blogs, use emails to tell customer success stories, behind the scenes insights, and mission-driven narratives. And we've seen this through Glossier. Their founder, Emily Weiss's journey her entire journey from start to finish was how she was able to connect with its beauty-obsessed audience, and that resonated entirely with their audience. Now, the last aspect of this is website and about pages. Your about page should tell a compelling brand story, not just a company history, which is something we always encourage our brands to think about. Now, as we get to the conclusion of this episode, I'm going to give you three key takeaways to think through when you think about storytelling within your business. First, stories build emotional connections and increase brand recall. Your customers, not your brand, should be the hero, and authenticity and consistency are key to effective storytelling. Now, we know the best brands don't just sell, they inspire, connect, and make people feel something. So, what's the story that your brand's telling? Let me know your favorite brand story in the comments or send me a DM, and subscribe for more insights on building an impactful marketing strategy. Thanks for tuning into Club Conversations, where marketing meets storytelling and connection meets strategy.